Stephanie and I have a great book recommendation for you. And actually, you started by recommending this book for me. We have young kids. My daughter, Cora, absolutely loved this book. So Stephanie told me to get it. I totally just entrust her implicitly. So I got it. But I'll say, Stephanie, Cora, we've been reading this book now for like 2 weeks straight. But there's so much in this. It's a great story, but also the math. So like, what are the things that you really loved about it when you were reading it with your kids?
Yeah, so I will say similarly, like my sister-in-law gave it to my kids, but I think she really gave it to me. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, so we are very much in like really early math ideas, but there's so much in here between the pictures, the story is funny, there's, beans flying through the air, which of course gets my 2-year-old excited. But I think for me, it was the fact that there is math just so organically showing up in the story. And I think part of that is because of this 13 and then like what is special about the number 13 between the fact that like it's one more than 12 and 12 has a lot of factors. And so there's a lot of ways that we can group 12 and have this one thing left over. And so that for me really drew me into the authentic way that we could have math conversations within a really fun story.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned 13 because one of the conversations Cora and I had is she wanted to know, why is 13 unlucky? Like, what does that mean? Like, and so I said, oh, well, it's kind of superstitious, and I explained what that means and stuff. You know how it goes, right? But it was an amazing conversation because we were talking about how some hotels don't have a 13th floor. So then she was like, well, is 13 really a bad number? I said, well, my classroom was 13, room 13, that when I taught 2nd grade. And so it wasn't unlucky for me. And it's just kind of a neat thing I never thought I'd be talking about with Cora at bedtime, but it was like, it just came from this organically from the book.
Well, and that makes me think about at the end where like everybody gets the number of beans that they need, but we don't know exactly how many beans each person gets, and not every person gets the same amount. We talk a lot about sharing in our house and what's fair, and like also understanding that what one kid needs might not be the exact same as what another kid needs. And so that idea was also very helpful for us as like, everybody got what they needed, but it didn't necessarily have to be exactly the same.
Yeah, right. Which means I'm actually realizing if you don't know the story, we should probably tell you a little bit about it. So essentially these bugs are picking beans and they get 12. They're super happy with it. And then one's like, how about I grab one more? And the other one's like, no, that's bean 13. It's unlucky. And so then they're trying to divide up the beans to share, but no one wants to eat bean 13. So they invite other friends over. But every time they do, bean 13 is still causing problems, right? Which is that whole factors and stuff with 12. The other thing that was kind of neat that came up was like, when you mentioned the organic math, is Cora, like on one of the pages, it shows that they put them into 3 groups or 3 piles, and there was the one left over. And Cora said, there's 4 groups, and she was counting, or 4 piles. And then I said, well, what's a pile? And she said, well, it's like a group of something. And I said, well, how many piles do you see? And so she saw 3 groups of 4 plus the other one. And we had a conversation, is one considered a pile or not? And then she even said, like, oh, so there's 1, 2, 3 groups, and each group has 1, 2, 3, 4. And so it's 12 plus the 13. And I mean, she's 5, and there's nothing that's forced with it. It really just is this organic way to invite kids to think about equal groups and sharing and all of that. Any other things come up for you?
So that makes me think about how I would use this book in the classroom. And so for really young kids, I would probably think about just, what are some of these ideas that are coming up? What is a pile? What are these equal groups? How are we using different combinations, but getting to 13 every single time, whether it's groups of the same size plus 1, or at the end where it's all these different size combinations, getting to 13. And then in some of the upper grades, I think about like really giving kids a really strong context and foundation for when we're thinking about factors, when we're thinking about quantities that multiply together, and really giving them a strong structure of, when I talk about the number 12 and I talk about all the factors, all the combinations that get me to 12, this is going to stay with you, and this is going to help a kid remember, how do I get to that 12?
Yeah, right. And then I also think, like, what if you had like 14 beans, but 13 guests or 6 guests or whatever it is? Like, can you cut beans in half, and how does that affect the situation, right? So what happens to bean 13 if it's split in half? Is it like half unlucky? Is it like who knows, right? But these are great conversations, or even like generalizing, what other numbers would produce similar situations where all the ways you try to divide it, there's always that extra amount that doesn't work, even if it's not necessarily an unlucky number. So it feels like there's a lot of different directions we can go with this. So we would love to hear from you. What other ideas do you have? If you've read the book, and you've used it with students, let us know in the comments, or just even from our little overview of what the story is. What ideas do you have for exploring this idea of equal groups and sharing 13 things among a group of people? We'd love to hear your thoughts.